Okay, so you know how much we all love to really get under the hood of these big tech stories?
Oh, yeah.
And you're here because you want to know the whole story, not just, the headlines.
Right.
Well, buckle up, because today we are diving deep into the rise and fall of HTC.
Oh, this is going to be good.
Yeah, we've got this super in-depth market research article that tells their whole story.
I think a lot of people, especially those who've been following tech for a while, they remember HTC as like this powerhouse, especially back in the late 2000s, early 2010s.
Right.
I mean, think about it. They were huge in the early days of Windows Mobile and Android.
Yeah.
Actually launched the very first Android phone.
Yeah, the HTC dream.
Yeah. Or, as some people might remember it, the T-Mobile G1, way back in 2008.
Oh, wow, yeah.
But they weren't just early, they were known for their crazy, innovative designs.
Oh, yeah, they had those gorgeous high-res displays. Right?
Absolutely. And who could forget that partnership with Beats by Dre?
Oh, yeah.
Bringing that premium audio right to the forefront.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy to think back to how dominant they actually were.
It really is.
So get this, by 2011, they were the top smartphone vendor in the U.S.
Wow.
That means they were selling more phones than Apple and Samsung.
That's wild when you think about it now.
Yeah.
Like, how did they get there, and then what happened?
Right. That's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Yeah.
How could a company that was so on top experience such a huge fall?
It's a great question.
So yeah, today we're going to dig into all the factors that led to this shift.
This is a story about business strategy and innovation and competition.
Right.
And it's a story that anyone can learn from.
So let's rewind back to that initial climb to the top, because it wasn't just luck.
No, what?
They were doing some pretty groundbreaking stuff.
Oh, absolutely. The article points to a bunch of innovations.
Yeah.
Their aluminum unibody designs, for one thing.
Okay.
Those give their phones a really premium look and feel that
Right.
set them apart from everyone else.
Yeah.
Then you had the ultra-pixel camera technology.
Oh, yeah. I remember that was a big deal.
Right. It was a big deal, especially for its low-light performance.
Right.
And let's not forget Sense UI,
Yeah.
which offered a really distinct, as the article puts it, high-end Android experience.
Yeah, so they weren't just another Android phone.
No.
They really carved out their own space.
Exactly.
And that moment when they became the top vendor in the U.S. in 2011,
yeah.
that really proves how strong they were.
Yeah, it wasn't just by chance.
Right. They earned it.
Absolutely.
So it makes their fall even more fascinating to explore.
Right. Like, how could this happen?
Yeah, it shows how quickly things can change in this industry.
Yeah, so the article, it doesn't point to one reason for the decline. It was
Yeah.
more like a combination of challenges.
Okay, so for those listening,
Yeah,
understanding these multiple factors is really key.
absolutely.
It shows that even small missteps can add up and have a big impact.
Yeah, like a snowball effect.
Exactly. So the article points to a few things, like a lack of clear differentiation and some inconsistencies with their branding.
Yeah, they had those early standout features,
Right.
but they never really built a strong brand identity.
Like Apple or Samsung.
Exactly. Apple has that emotional connection,
Yeah.
that ecosystem lock-in.
Right.
Samsung has that massive product range and huge marketing.
Right.
HTC's market, it was all over the place.
Right.
It lacked a clear message.
Okay.
They never clearly explained why a consumer should choose HTC over, all the other phones out there.
And on top of that, they kept changing their branding, right?
Yeah.
New names for their devices.
Think about it from the consumer's perspective.
Yeah.
All that inconsistency just makes it so confusing.
Yeah, like who are these guys?
Right, and it weakens brand recall.
Totally. It's like they kept trying on different looks, but never found one that stuck.
Yeah, great analogy.
And this was all happening as the Android market was getting super crowded.
Oh, yeah.
So that initial advantage they had of being the premium Android brand,
Yeah.
that was quickly fading away.
Exactly. Competitors like Samsung and Huawei were coming in strong.
Right. So tell me more about their strategy.
Well, Samsung in particular, they were very smart. They offered a much wider range of devices, different price points for everyone.
Got it.
They also put a ton of money into marketing and R&D,
Right.
building out their ecosystem,
Yeah.
positioning themselves as the top dog in the Android world.
Right.
They wanted to be the Android.
Yeah. So it sounds like HTC just couldn't compete with that level of spending.
Yeah, the article mentions that HTC had much less money to throw around.
And that makes a huge difference, right?
Oh, yeah. In a market where visibility is everything.
Right.
You got to spend money to make money.
Right.
So naturally, HTC started losing market share.
Yeah, as consumers were drawn to those other phones.
Right. The ones with more features and more advertising.
Exactly. And it seems like HTC also struggled to keep their phones different
Yeah.
and to build that customer loyalty.
Right. They had some cool features early on,
Right.
but they didn't do enough to keep people coming back.
It's not enough to have like one cool thing for a year or two.
No, not at all. The article talks about the power of an ecosystem.
Okay.
Like Apple,
Right.
they have the iPhone, iPad, Mac all working together.
Seamlessly. Yeah.
Right. So people are more likely to stick with Apple products.
Right.
And Samsung, they have unique hardware and software,
Right.
like the S Pen
Okay.
or their super AMOLED displays.
Right.
So those things create loyal customers.
So HTC had some early wins,
Yeah.
but they didn't create that stickiness.
Yeah. And even their ultra-pixel camera.
Right, which was initially unique. That got overtaken by competitors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They started using multiple lenses and AI. And
Ah.
HTC, they just couldn't keep up.
So they kind of plateaued,
Yeah, in a way.
at least in terms of innovation.
Yeah, they had that initial burst,
Right.
but then they struggled to keep up with Apple and Samsung. Apple, they came out with Face ID and all that ecosystem stuff.
Right.
Samsung, they kept pushing with foldable phones and those crazy high refresh rate displays.
Right.
And HTC, they were hesitant to try new things.
So they fell behind in things like camera performance,
Yeah.
battery life, AI features.
Right, all those things that people care about
Right.
when they're buying a new phone.
So then it sounds like they weren't meeting those core user expectations.
Exactly.
And this leads us to another issue the article talks about.
Yeah.
Marketing and distribution.
Right, even if you have a great product,
Yeah.
people need to know about it.
Right. And they need to be able to buy it.
Exactly. And the article is pretty clear on this point.
Yeah.
HTC's marketing was just not on the same level as Apple and Samsung.
Yeah, they didn't have those huge budgets.
Right.
And they didn't have those memorable ad campaigns.
Yeah, they lacked those strong brand ambassadors.
Yeah.
The ones that really stick in people's minds.
Exactly. And what about distribution?
Yeah, so in the US, you need to have good relationships with the mobile carriers.
Right.
Samsung and Apple, they had those deep partnerships.
Yeah.
So their phones were everywhere.
Right. Front and center in the stores.
Exactly.
With great deals.
Yeah, and HTC, they just couldn't compete with that.
So even if someone was interested in an HTC phone,
Yeah.
they might not have even seen it in a store
Right.
or heard about it from their carrier.
Exactly.
So it's a huge barrier.
It is. It really limits your reach
Right.
and your ability to compete.
Okay, so it all boils down to this final point the article makes.
Yeah.
They failed to adapt to changing consumer preferences.
It's almost like the inevitable outcome of everything else.
Right.
Consumer priorities, they were shifting.
Things like camera tech,
Yeah.
battery life,
Yeah.
seamless software,
Stop it.
AI, all those things.
And Apple and Samsung were investing in R&D
Yeah.
to meet those needs.
Right, they were ahead of the curve.
That HTC, they were slow to react. Yeah, the article talks about the HTC U12 Plus.
Oh.
That phone, it didn't even have a physical power button.
Really?
Yeah, it had these pressure-sensitive controls
Oh, wow.
that a lot of people hated.
Yeah, I can imagine.
They were also slow to adopt OLED displays.
Which offer better picture quality.
Exactly.
And their software updates were slow, too.
Yeah, so in a market where those things matter,
Right.
HTC was just falling behind.
So it was like a perfect storm. They
Yeah.
had that initial spark,
Right.
but then they struggled with branding.
Yeah.
They got outmaneuvered by the competition.
Right.
They lost their innovative edge.
Yeah.
Their marketing and distribution were weak.
Absolutely.
And they didn't adapt to what consumers wanted.
It's a tough combination.
Yeah, so the article does talk about HTC's attempts to make a comeback.
Oh, yeah.
They released new phones.
Yeah.
They explored the mid-range market.
Right.
And they had some success with the HTC Vive,
Oh, yeah, in the VR space.
which was a really cool product.
It was innovative. Right.
But the Vive alone couldn't save their smartphone business.
Right. And they ended up selling part of that division to Google in 2017,
Yeah.
which shows how much pressure they were under.
Yeah.
And ultimately, those efforts weren't enough
Right.
to regain their market share.
The smartphone world was now dominated by Apple, Samsung, and those Chinese manufacturers.
So looking back at this whole journey,
Yeah.
what are the big lessons here?
What can other tech companies learn from HTC's experience?
And maybe even businesses in other industries.
Yeah, the article highlights several key takeaways.
Okay.
First, you need a strong brand identity,
Yeah.
a consistent message
Right.
about who you are, what you offer, why people should choose you.
Right. You got to stand out.
Exactly. And HTC, they struggled with that.
Yeah. If people don't understand your brand,
Yeah.
they're not going to be loyal.
Exactly.
Okay.
What else?
Fair.
Continuous innovation is key.
Especially in tech.
Yeah, you can't just sit back and relax.
Right. You got to keep pushing forward. You got to invest in R&D
Right.
to stay ahead of the curve.
It's like the Red Queen's race.
Exactly. You have to run just to stay in place.
And then there's marketing and distribution.
Oh, yeah.
Those are so important.
You can have the best product in the world,
Yeah.
but if no one knows about it,
Right.
it's not going to sell.
You got to get it in front of people.
Exactly.
Okay, so brand innovation, marketing distribution.
Right.
What else?
Customer loyalty
Oh, yeah.
and building an ecosystem
Okay.
like Apple and Samsung. They've created these environments where everything works together.
Seamlessly.
Right? So people are more likely to stay with those brands.
Right.
HTC, they didn't do that.
And finally,
Yeah.
you got to be adaptable.
Absolutely.
The market is always changing.
You got to be able to pivot.
Respond to new trends.
Exactly. HTC was slow to do that.
And it cost them.
Yeah.
So to recap,
Yeah.
HTC was a pioneer.
Right.
They had early success.
They did.
But then they faced a bunch of challenges.
Branding, competition, innovation, you name it.
And they couldn't keep up.
Right.
So their market share plummeted.
The article says it went from over 10% in 2011
Wow.
to less than 1% by 2020.
That is wild.
It is.
And now they're focused on VR.
Yeah, with the HTC Vive.
It's a reminder that even the biggest companies can fall.
Yeah, if they don't adapt.
So as you think about HTC's story,
Yeah.
it makes you wonder
About what?
what challenges are lurking out there
Oh, yeah.
for today's tech giants.
Right. What are those overlooked trends
Yeah,
that could disrupt the market?
it's something to think about.
Absolutely. The tech world is always changing.